I think you must realize that some people are going to go to your show at the planetarium and they're going to say, aha, those scientists have discovered God. Because God, dark matter, is what holds this universe together.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
You look at the formation of the Earth and the earliest sign of fossil life. Subtract a few hundred million years at the beginning of Earth, when Earth was a shooting gallery. Earth was still accreting the birth materials of the solar system. It's hostile to complex chemistry over that time. Not fair to start the clock then. Wait a couple hundred million years, now start the clock, and wait around and see when you have the first signs of single-celled life. At most, 400 million years. At most. Earth has been around for 4.5 billion? So Earth, without any help from us, with basic ingredients found throughout the universe, managed to create life, simple though it was. So, and Earth, one of, 8 planets, get over it. One of, sorry. Earth, an ordinary star, to suggest, and what are the ingredients of life? The number 1 atom in your body is hydrogen. Number 2 atom is oxygen, together making mostly water that's in you. Next is carbon in this order. Next is nitrogen. Next is other stuff. My favorite element, other, yeah. You look at the universe, the number 1 element in the universe is hydrogen. Next is helium, chemically inert, couldn't do anything with it anyway. Next is carbon. I think I left out oxygen there. Next is oxygen. Next is nitrogen, 1 for 1. We're not even made of odd things. The most common things in the universe are found here on Earth, and we're made of them. And carbon, one of the most chemically fertile element on the periodic table. It's not a surprise, we're carbon-based. Life is just the extreme expression of complex chemistry. Point is, it happened relatively quickly with the most common ingredients in the universe. To now say life on Earth is unique in the universe would be inexcusably egocentric.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Oh, So why am I even going here? Because I'm trying to explain to you that you fast forward, the dangers here is that you fast forward to 21st century America and ask, what influences are we feeling now? Because that naming period in Islam stopped and it never recovered. Because the way of thinking about the natural world, revelation replaced investigation. Okay? So I fast forward to 21st century, and what do you find? You get things like this. Okay? This is in America. All right? So now, what I find interesting is the level of passion that it requires to actually do it. You gotta pay for this, okay? And it means a lot of people are pissed off at the Big Bang. They're pissed off at the Big Bang. At our museum in New York, the American Museum of Natural History, they come to the Big Bang exhibit, and sometimes I don't feel like having that conversation. I say, why don't you go to our hall of human biology first, and then come to us? And that's where we have sort of monkeys holding hands with people in skeleton forms, and then they never make it back to the Big Bang. They're gone forever. Okay, so however egregious the Big Bang is, monkeys and people is a worse transgression, apparently. Astrology. This is what you do. Get a classroom of people, a group of people who are believers, and don't do what they want. This is what you do. Go to the horoscope that day. Pluck one at random, read it to that audience and say, whose horoscope did I just read? 2/3 of the hands will go up, okay? Which we know is not how that's supposed to work. It should really be 1/12 if it had any sense at all. That's the simplest test that I know to demonstrate to someone that it's just bunk, other than the rational arguments that you might spend time offering. Like where the sun was when you were born doesn't match where it was 2,000 years ago when this got laid out. And the fact that there are 14 constellations in the zodiac, not 12. One of them is Ophiuchus. Any Ophiuchans here? Okay? Some people know they're Ophiuchans. The sun, after passing through Scorpio, spends more time in Ophiuchus than it did in Scorpius. So if you thought you were Scorpion, you're probably Ophiuchian, and all Ophiuchans and Scorpions are currently Librans. That's how that plays out. So you go around the world and you find times and places where nations have excelled in one subject or another. There's a birth of that period of where they excel, and then there's a peak, and sometimes it drops off, and sometimes they hang on. And so you can ask the culture of that. What was going on in that nation to support those discoveries? And then what happened when they ended? And so I call that sort of naming rights. If you were there first and you did it best, you name things. Particle physics in this country, in the United States, was like going gangbusters after the Second World War. And the discovery of atomic elements, look at the periodic table. There's berkelium, californium, you know, we got half the United States up there in the upper, heavier elements of the periodic table. Am I right there, Sir Weinberg? Okay, I don't want to. That's not because the world liked California or Berkeley. It's because the work was done here. It's because there was an effort to excel in just those subjects. And it shows up in other ways. Well, I'll give you just briefly. You know, part of the naming rights is that you don't have to name it. So, for example, while we didn't invent the internet, we certainly exploited it here in America. We did that sort of first and best. And so your email address does not end in .us. Everybody else is in the world, they got to say what country they came from. We don't. Okay? It's simple, but it's the consequence of being there first and doing it better than anyone had done it before. Do you know that the British postage stamp is the only postage stamp in the world that does not identify the country of origin? Because they invented postage stamps. So why should they have to say what country it is? It's their invention. Okay? Check them out. It's just the facts of this. The constellations of the night sky, it's the Greek and Roman, and it's lasted to this time because they did a really good job thinking that stuff up. All the mythologies of the heavens, that really stuck with us. All right, so I'm going to make a larger point, not to get gratuitous on you here, but September 11th, 2001, as we all know, this was going on in New York City. This is the view outside of my window. I live 4 blocks from ground zero. Excuse me, this is the corner of the building in which I live. I went outside to get this view. I was at the time judging whether I should go collect my daughter, who was in an elementary school 2 blocks north of the North Tower. North is to the right in this picture. So I want to get a closer view with a highly magnified zoom lens to see what, while that was happening, the plane flew into the South Tower. And so no one was thinking terrorism until the second one was hit. The first one was just sort of a bad tragedy. And so these are just 3 frames from my camcorder. This is at t equals 0. This is 1 second, well, like actually a fraction of a second. The plane was moving probably 500 miles an hour. And just to understand, the black building, that black sort of monolithic building, that is 50 stories tall. This is New York City, people. So tall buildings are kind of, they're just all over the place. And that's just a hotel, a 50-story hotel. And it's the towers are foreshortened because they're the angle at which this is shown. I put these up because a few days after this, President Bush, I don't remember where he said this, on the steps of the White House, in the Rose Garden or at the Capitol, in an attempt to distinguish we from they, the terrorists who flew these planes into the buildings and into the, that went down in Pennsylvania and in Washington, to distinguish we from they, he loosely quotes a phrase out of the Bible by saying, our God is the God who named the stars. Now, this is before I was on his Rolodex, okay? Because I could have helped him out there. After the war ends, if there's any way you're going to go into space, you better study that rocket. That's why every rocket in science fiction stories in the 1950s looked like the V-2. It had fins, it was bullet-shaped, Did you just take a picture of me like this? Okay. So the influence was huge. People's visions of space. The spaceship had fins, and you know what else had fins? Our cars had fins. If you go to the designers, they're not going to say, oh, I did this because rockets have fins. It was in the air. Exploration of space became part of our culture. The first time we ever left Earth was Apollo 8. Doesn't get the attention it deserves relative to Apollo 11. These three astronauts were Men of the Year. 1968, Anders, Borman, and Lovell. They orbited the moon, Apollo 8. They took this picture. I'm almost done here, so I know you got to vote or something, or go somewhere. Does that? If you have a healthy science program in your country, you guarantee your economic future. You're innovating. Then you don't have to have arguments about tariff regulations on products. You don't have to worry about jobs going overseas because they don't know how to do it yet, because you just invented it. I can't stand it when I hear these discussions about our job force. I have to close my ears. Yeah, you can put up some tariffs. Yes, you can complain about they're paying their workers less. Sure. Okay. But as long as you understand why you're in that situation, it's because you've stopped innovating and everybody else has caught up with you, and if you have a global economy, it's the job of the corporation to make it for as cheap as possible, so they're going to make it overseas. That's what they're going to do. It's incumbent upon them to do so. But if you keep innovating, the stuff stays here, the jobs stay here. You don't even need to have tariffs because there's nothing to tariff. You assure the economic stability of your future. So when I hear people say, oh, we can't afford NASA, we can't afford it, we can't, it's like, you can't afford not to. What he did was he didn't invoke Zeus to account for the rock that he's standing on or the air he's breathing. It was this point of mystery, and in gets invoked God. This, over time, has been described by philosophers as the God of the gaps. Mm-hmm. If that's where you're going to put your God in this world, then God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance. If that's how you're going to invoke God, if God is the mystery of the universe, these mysteries, we're tackling these mysteries one by one. If you're going to stay religious at the end of the conversation, God has to be more to you than just where science has yet to tread. So to the person who says, maybe dark matter is God, if the only reason why you're saying it's because it's a mystery, then get ready to have that undone. Consider not long ago when so much of the Western world the state was the religion. And we have actually moved quite a distance from that, compared with 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, the era of the Inquisition and this sort of thing. And so to say that it has such a grip, it has a fraction of the grip that it once did on the operations of human conduct and of society. So the real question is, if implicit in that is, given what we know of science, why would religion still have any grip at all? Not why does it still have a big grip? Because it's not a big grip when you look in the developed world. So, in fact, most of Europe are just, they're whole countries where religion has essentially disappeared entirely. And the countries are not full of violence, and it's just the assumption that you have to be religious to be moral is a false one. It's empirically false because you just look around in places where that's the case. So, so that's one fact. And we pull away from that a little. There's plenty of what goes on in religious texts that has tremendous value to how to think about life and how to treat one another. In fact, Jefferson created what was essentially what you can think of as Thomas Jefferson, the Jefferson Bible. I don't know if you ever heard of this. He went through the Bible, and I think both the Old and the New Testaments, and he crossed off everything that was sort of mythical, magical, things that clearly violated known laws of nature, and kept the rest, and said, here is the stuff of the Bible that should have value to any modern person going forward. If you look at people who are religious today, who are not in conflict with science, they have viewed their religious text as a spiritual, something that gives them spiritual support, not as a science textbook. The conflict in society is when you have those who are still religious, who want to use their religious text as their access point to understanding the natural world. And persistent efforts of the past to make that happen have just simply failed. The Bible does not work as a science textbook. In fact, Galileo knew this, and he himself was a religious man. He's famously quoted as saying, the Bible tells you how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. So on that scale, the conflict comes about when that subset of the religious community feels threatened by scientific discoveries that are different from how they interpret what the natural world should be in the Bible.
I think it's that point where you get to the concept of the God of the gaps. You go, we do not understand this, science takes us so far, but we don't understand anything beyond that, therefore, that's God. The stuff that we don't get, that's God. And the trouble with that is the moment that you actually go, no, we do understand that now. Is people going, well, did God just go away then? And it goes back, nice simple things like the rainbow. The point where you go, well, the rainbow actually, it's an optical effect. It's not something magic that gets put up in the sky to memorialize the flood.
Plus, did you know that everyone sees a unique rainbow?
No.
That's right. The rainbow is an optical effect for the person who sees it. So if you stand 10 feet to my left, you see a different rainbow than I see. It's a remarkable, fun fact about rainbows.
My favorite fun fact about rainbows is the fact that they were originally believed to have 6 color bands, but that Newton added indigo and violet.
Yeah, Newton liked
his 7.
The number 7. He had the mystical feeling for the number 7. Throws in indigo that no one else sees.
Yeah, hands up here. Who actually goes, indigo, violet, there's the indigo. You don't. You just go purple.
Yeah, exactly.
Go blue, purple. But
so another thing about the rainbow, because each rainbow is unique to the viewer, it can only be a rainbow that is exactly face-on to you. You've never seen a rainbow that was like at an oblique angle. Think about it. They're exactly hemispherical in front of you. That's why you can never get to the base of the rainbow. Because that would mean your perspective on it would change. That's what makes it a good place to hide the gold. Okay? In case you didn't know. All right.
Are you outing yourself here as an unbeliever in leprechauns? People have been burned at stakes for
Indeed am. Another thing, you mentioned the God of the gaps. In a free society, a free pluralistic society, where the freedom of the expression of religion is constitutionally protected, which is a fundamental part of why America was so attractive to immigrants from around the world, whose religious differences were not being supported in their hometown. I will never be one to tell you what you should believe or what you should not believe. What I will say is that if you want to say that where we don't understand things, that's where God rests, that's where God operates, the God of the gaps argument, because I get asked that all the time. What was around before the universe? I don't know. Must have been something, God. So they got to stick in God where we're not there yet. And I just say, we got top people working on that. It's a current frontier. We're not there yet. And given the history of the moving frontier, where people had previously said, well, God must be operating, we're long past that. Those explanations have come. And so there's no compelling reason to say God did it and then sort of give up and go on to the next problem. My issue with the God of the gaps is that if you feel that way, you should not be writing the science curriculum of a classroom. Okay? That's all. Okay? Because if you do, you are undermining the very process of what science is all about. Because the God of the gaps principle is like it's a philosophy of ignorance, whereas science is a philosophy of discovery. And that's an important distinction between the two. And if you remove that foundation for what builds science, you are undermining the capacity of your culture, of your nation, to compete technologically in the 21st century. So it is not without consequence to have conduct of that way.
We all watched this show when we were kids with Carl Sagan. What is it like to step into his turtleneck? What is...
You get to say the world is flat because we live in a country that guarantees your free speech, but it's not a country that guarantees that anything you say is correct.
It's the motherfucking Eagle Double G.
Snoop Dogg. I remember I was there. We were coming over a bridge with a friend, and he saw the sunset and the radiant rays, and he said, "Oh, it's beautiful. God's talking to me. That's God." And I said, "Because it's beautiful? Is that why you say that?" And he said, "Yeah, it's just." And I said, "Well, do you think about God when you get a close-up view of the underbelly of a tarantula? Are you thinking, oh, beautiful?" No, you're not, right? But it's in the same universe. So if you're selective about the list you draw, then the universe could look like any philosophy you want it to look like. But once you take it all in, you realize that the universe wants to kill us. 99% of all the species that have ever lived are now extinct. Earth is not some cradle for life. It is a place that wants to kill us. Viruses, asteroids, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes. And so we're running away from these things, and we find a little place that we think is safe, then the flood comes. And then, okay, now we finally got a place, now the temperature drops, we gotta like put on clothing and get heat, and isn't Earth so beautiful for us? It's like, no. So I would just be cautious about that. I understand the urge.
But there are certain laws of physics that the universe follows.
I would rather reword that statement to say there are laws of physics that describe the universe. Because the universe could care less about what we think of it. The universe is not obeying our laws of physics. So, but yes, that's correct. There are laws of physics. So, there are people who say that the laws of physics is the expression of God. And if you want to say that, fine. In fact, that's very close to Spinoza's God. Spinoza's God was whatever you find to be the order of the universe, that is the expression of God. And that's a very different God from the God who's listening to prayers and that sort of thing, or who puts dinosaurs on arks. These are different kinds of gods, okay? And so that would be closer to Spinoza's God. But be cautious there, because in the days when no one understood what was going on in the heavens, that was used as evidence that it was the handiwork of God, because why would you ever understand God, what God did? The fact that you didn't understand it was the citation of God at work. So now to say, we do understand it, there are laws, and also claim that that is the handiwork of God, that is riding both sides of that horse. And so I don't have a problem with it, but one needs to be aware of this philosophical trend where God is what you don't know and God is what you do know, so God is everything. And if that, then I'd ask, is fine, but is that going to help me make my next scientific discovery? If not, I'm going to put it over here and bring in the books that will. However, if what you believe is demonstrably false, and you want to pass it off as true in a science classroom, I have an issue with that. If you want to say it in the religion class, fine. In the belief system class, fine. In the history of human thought class, fine. And I don't know how many of you, I managed to get like a little letter to the editor in the New York Times a month ago. Do you remember that case in New Jersey where there was the middle school student who tape recorded the history teacher saying that the students will burn in hell if they don't believe in Jesus Christ? Do you remember that? And it became a whole hullabaloo in the district, and they would say separation of church and state, this is a violation of the First Amendment, or Second, whichever amendment, okay? First Amendment, separation of church and state. And everybody got up on the ALC, the American Civil Liberties Union, everybody's jumping in arms about separating church and state. And I'm saying, among the statements made by this teacher were that the Big Bang and evolution were not scientific theories, and that Noah's Ark carried dinosaurs. Now, so, at some point, I said, I can't keep listening to this. And I wrote a really short letter. Short letters are the best, I think. And all I said was, after 2 other letters rambling on about keeping religion out of the school because of the amendment in the Constitution, I said, this is not an issue of the separation of church and state. No, you got that wrong. This is an issue of the separation of ignorant, scientifically illiterate people from the ranks of school teachers.
Since you are our future, I want you to understand something and not forget it. Are you ready? Okay. Religions all over the world constitutes what we call belief systems. Okay? And your freedom to believe whatever you want is a right and even a privilege in a free society. That's a good thing. Consider, however, that if you believe something that's part of a religious philosophy, and someone else has a different religion that's a different religious philosophy, and you're not agreeing with one another, and there's another religion over here and another over here, and they don't agree, you're still free to believe what you want. But what that tells you is that it is unstable to build a government on a belief system. What you want is objectively verifiable truths around which we can all agree. That's what you build your economic system on, your governance on. Once you have that, then you go forth to your mosques, and to your churches, and to your... Go forth and preach and believe whatever you want. But know the difference, as Galileo did, between how to go to heaven and how the heavens go. That's my answer to it.
Education, I think, at its best, is not telling you you're wrong, or even telling you you're right. It's teaching you how to be curious so that you know how to find an answer. And so if I tell you that if you rub these crystals together, it'll heal you, and you say, oh, wow, that's great, give me them, I'll buy them. You say, well, that's stupid, right? Or if you say, that's ridiculous, get out of here, you know, that is equally as intellectually lazy as it is to accept them. What takes more work is questioning it. Where they come from? What are they made of? What's their chemical composition? Where did you find them? What tests showed that what you're... By the time you ask, the person's gone. They're not going to sell it to you because you asked questions. So the point is there are people who are being handed their opinions. They're being handed their points of views by people who they do not know how to question.